the August 1st meeting of the Human Services Committee of the City of Evanston. We have 3 members of 5 present, and so we do have a quorum. The first agenda item is approval of the minutes from July 6, 2011. Any comments, changes, alterations?
Move approval of the minutes of July 6, 2011.
Is there a second?
Second.
Did you have any, were you making any?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted the record to reflect that that Alderman Burris indicated that the one dog attack that she experienced was in 2006, I believe.
Correct.
But that was not at that meeting. I mean, did
She
send an email or something later? That wasn't at the meeting.
She spoke of it later just to let us know the...
Right, I remember
Okay.
that, but I mean, it wasn't part of these minutes.
It's not a matter of record.
Right, absolutely.
Anything else? So move to approve. Say aye.
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 Aye. Minutes are approved. First item for consideration, Township of Evanston July monthly bills.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The monthly bills of the Township of Evanston are approved. H2, Ordinance 52011, amending certain provisions of Title IX, Chapter 4 of the Evanston Municipal Code entitled Dogs, Cats, Animals, and Fowl regarding dangerous dogs. This has been held over from the request of Alderman Fisk from the July 6th meeting, and would you like to move to approve it, or do we? I know you.
I would move approval to get it on the.
Oh, okay.
For discussion.
Right. Okay. For discussion. And also, we have citizen comments, so we should invite the 2 people that have signed up to speak of this agenda item. The first is John Barfield, I believe. The second is Tom. I can't quite read. Okay. Thank you. John Barfield, would you like to come up to one of the podiums, state your name and address?
Hi, Honorable Elected. My name is John Barfield, and I live at 921 Elmwood, and I'm here to share some suggestive thoughts to you about the dog issue in Evanston. I have been the victim of 2 dog attacks in my neighborhood by aggressive dogs that are commonly known as pit bulls. My neighbor have had a dog seriously mauled by the same set of dogs from a house in our neighborhood, and causing a lot of expense. My concern is that here in Evanston, I notice in my district, the 4th Ward, there's a large number of unleashed dogs in the area. In Nichols Playground, you can go from 4 to 5, you can see all types of dogs unleashed with children playing dog fights, and I'm really more pushing that we enhance our lease ordinance and that the fine be increased for people who go about the community with unleashed dogs. I believe the dogs should be under control, verbally and physically. The second is I think that dog bites should be reported to the Public Health Department, and we should track them. I think it's a public health challenge when you're mauled and galled on the street, and we should have some sense. In hearing you all, you just didn't look like a pulse on the dog bites. You had numbers. But I was seriously impacted by my bites, my 2 times bite, and I had some difficulty navigating through the dog catchers. And then, this was 4 years ago, I had to come twice and meet with the chief of police because I wanted something done about the house that continued to have these aggressive dogs. And I wanted a fence put up around that's locked so I could walk down the street without fearing for those dogs coming out and attack. And second, I think that we should begin to report houses that have aggressive dogs. You start reporting to property standards. I think they should be tracking the houses causes, because the issue I had that the landlord said, oh, those are not the same dogs that bit you 2 years ago. These are new dogs. Well, a dog bite is a dog bite, and I'm not asking for the ID when they're trying to bite me. So that was a ring around that I had to go with. So I really hope that we enforce the lease. You know, in my district, it's a big issue. Nichols Playground's a sign is huge, as you can see, no dogs on the playground. But you can go there from 4 to 5 and see, 4 to 9 and see dogs. I think parking enforcement may be a very good tool for enforcing the leased dogs. They can stop, they're around in the area, they can get out and ticket these people who have their dogs unleashed. I think this will free the police up to chase some of those who are selling $10 bags of marijuana. So, you know, they can just, you know, chase some, you know, some dogs. So thank you very much, and it's just suggestive thoughts that you put in. Say, dog bites are serious, and you're traumatized afterwards.
Thank you.
Could I ask Mr. Barfield a question?
Mr. Barfield, Alderman Fisk has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Barfield, for coming tonight. I really appreciate your comments. You did report your dog bites to the police?
I had to go around and around because the first time they act like they didn't have a ticket on. I said, but I called the police when the dog chased me up on my porch. Then I had to really get up in their face about, yeah, I've called before, because then they were saying, because I was calling on the second time when the dog chased me up a tree up on Nichols schoolyard. Then they found the ticket. I said, you know, something had to be done and then I had to go around. Then the animal warden at that time was not very friendly. I just thought it was the color of my skin that they didn't care. But I had to go back and forth, and I was asking, are those dogs, do they have their shots? I want to know. It took them 2 months to tell me if the dogs that had attacked me had the shots. So it was a lot of ring around, and I'm not saying the police chief then, Frank, was very nice, and I had several meetings with him, and I got letters. But it's a gap there. You know, dog bites are not serious, and I just say I think they're very serious, just as much as those selling marijuana out there on the street to me. You know.
And I'm sorry to keep you up there, but
That's okay.
did they take a police report?
The second time they did.
Okay.
The first time they said they didn't have one, then they found one. Then they told me, well, you didn't go to the doctor. And I said, well, I was scratched, but I was so traumatized. They said, well, we can't count that one because you didn't go and say that you have any injuries. So they didn't want to count. And I came to administration court twice on it, and they did get fines for having the dogs released, so the courts did support me. But citizens really, it's a merry-go-round to really get something done. That's why I'm suggesting that the public health department should be involved and property standards so we can monitor those sites and those places where there are aggressive dogs. It's unusual. I don't see this on the Evanston around Church and Dog. I don't see aggressive dogs unleashed and around the street, but definitely on my side of Main and Elmwood, dogs are unleashed and running around. There's a dog as big as a goat that goes down Main Street daily. There's a Doberman Pinscher that runs around in Gray Park, you know, and then they're just nice people who like to think Poochie is a nice dog, but they have him unleashed.
Right.
And so that's the unleashed part is the biggest concern for me.
Right. No,
I just say, keep them on the lease.
I hear you, and I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you. My name is Tom Okawara. I live at 1517 Kirk Street, Evanston, and I spoke before this committee last month, and I don't want to repeat what I said, but I just wish to submit to this committee that the dangerous dog ordinance as it is not working, and that in my experience, and the numbers will show, numbers will demonstrate that the current ordinance is not being effectively enforced. And I think this can be rectified by Alderman Burris's revisions to the dangerous dog ordinance. So I just wish to give my support to the revised ordinance as proposed by Alderman Burris. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Certainly. Alderman Fisk.
Mr. Okawara, is that the correct pronunciation of your name?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As I remember from your discussion and presentation to us last time, you were mainly concerned about tracking and record keeping and the police being responsive when a call came in. Am I understanding your concerns?
That is part of it. Yeah, it is being responsive to my request as well as my neighbor's request who was attacked by the same dog. Correct.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you. So now that we could move for approval and then discuss the,
So I'll second for discussion, I'll second the
thank you.
introduction. May I speak?
Certainly.
Okay, thanks. I'm concerned about the revisions to this ordinance, and I'm concerned about them for a number of reasons. Mainly, it has to do with both the language that's in the ordinance that I think is unnecessarily vague, and directly related to that are questions of due process. And like it or not, whether we consider dogs family members or however we consider dogs, they are legally considered personal property. And as such, dog owners have a right to due process when it comes to personal property decisions. What I would have preferred from the beginning is for us to have instructed legal staff to do a wholesale revision of the dangerous dog ordinance to bring it up to date with state-of-the-art ordinances in other communities. What I see written in this ordinance is basically putting a Band-Aid on top of a wound that you haven't cleaned. And in many ways, it's going to make matters worse for people who are in that gray area of, is their dog a dangerous dog or not? And I want to be sure that the public understands that a dog who bites is not necessarily a dangerous dog without considering the circumstances. And most dog ordinances in other communities are very specific about what those circumstances are. And I don't believe our ordinance is. I want us to be a progressive city, and I want us to have the best possible legislation that we can have. I don't want anyone's dog to be caught in a neither here nor there circumstance, which means their dog might be confiscated and euthanized. I want there to be a very clear avenue for dog owners to understand and to appeal. And to that end, I would point to a couple of communities, for example, Park Ridge just last year took another look at their dangerous dog regulations and seemed to have approached it in a slightly more thoughtful way than we are here in Evanston. I also want to say to those people who have had and have been the subject of dog attacks, there's nothing scarier than walking down the street and having a large dog come up and bite you. No one wants that. We don't want that. We have leash laws on the books that already address this. You're not allowed to have your dog off leash in Evanston anywhere except in designated areas. If they are off leash, you can call the police, and the police should come out and respond. And if we're having a problem with police response, then we need to deal with that. This ordinance isn't going to deal with that. This ordinance is only going to possibly designate a dog as dangerous. Now, some other communities also have made the distinction between a dangerous dog and a vicious dog. Highland Park, I think, is one of those communities. Either Highland Park or Park Ridge or another one of the communities I looked at have done this. And that is, again, with the consideration that there are instances in which dogs bite. I believe dogs on the dog beach have bitten other dogs. Sometimes that happens. Dogs sometimes are dogs. But no dog should bite a person. No dog should harm your personal property, which is your dog, when you're out on the street. No dog should be allowed to go unleashed. So how do we protect you, but how also do we recognize that we don't want a dog who's made a mistake to fall through the cracks and possibly be euthanized for that. And so that's where we have to ask people to do the right thing, follow the rules. We have to ask the police to enforce. I talked to Alderman Wilson before the meeting tonight and asked him to tell me about what had been going on in the 4th Ward. He said, and I knew the answer to this, but he confirmed that there had been one case of a dangerous dog in his ward that had been euthanized. They followed the procedure in our current ordinance. That seemed to have worked. It went through the process that's already outlined, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know the situation. I'm just saying unfortunately because I think it's very hard on dog owners who have made a commitment, hopefully to an animal that they love, to have it be euthanized. So that's what I mean when I say unfortunately. So please don't read anything, misinterpret anything I'm saying. Specifically, my problem with this ordinance is with Section 4. Section 4 provides, and this is, a lot of this is just poor drafting, I think, on the part of whoever drafted this ordinance. But any dog which has been found to be a dangerous dog or a vicious dog under the Illinois Animal Control Act 510 ILCS 515 that has been directed to be contained in an enclosure rather than being destroyed, which is not confined to an enclosure, shall be impounded by the animal control officer of the city police department. Said dog shall be turned over to a licensed veterinarian for destruction by lethal injection, subject to the provisions of the Animal Control Act. That language is pretty clear, but it also means that if your dog has been designated as a dangerous dog and you're not keeping it in a enclosed box in your backyard that's on top of a concrete pad, if somebody is removing that dog to take it into the house for whatever reason, according to this language, someone can confiscate that dog. The police department can confiscate that dog. I think we need to make it very, very clear what the process would be by the owner to be able to go and make the case that the dog has been misdiagnosed. In Section 5, prior to a decision, and it doesn't define decision of what? Decision of designation of a dangerous dog, decision to euthanize, what is that decision there? An evaluation will be performed at the request and upon the advance payment by the owner of the animal by a certified applied behaviorist, a board-certified veterinary behaviorist, or another recognized expert selected by the chief of police or his or her designee. Again, that wording needs to be made much more specific about when exactly this kicks in. Another problem associated with this is that there are various people or authorities making decisions about who designates, who you can file an appeal with when it goes to the circuit court or goes to administrative adjudication. I think that needs to be cleaned up. If you look at other ordinances through around the area, you will see that other communities specifically spell out either the administrative adjudication or the circuit court or the police department, but it's much more distinct than what is in the proposed ordinance. When I was, let me just tell you again, and I'm sorry to take so much time, but I think this is really important. I think it's important for us when we're looking at modifying legislation that's been on the books for a long time and is clearly out of date, that we make a decision about whether we do want to Band-Aid this or whether we want to really go back and look at the entire ordinance and have the ordinance be responsive to what your concerns are. Because what I'm hearing the concerns are is that you're not satisfied with the response that you got from the police department. And you want to be able to track the dog bites. You want somebody else to step in. You want not necessarily to designate a dog or euthanize a dog. That's not what I'm hearing here. What I'm hearing is that you would like to have a response to your concerns so that when you go out of your house, you're going to be assured that a dog's not going to come up and bite you or bite your dog.
Alderman Fisk, could we sort of share the conversation? I think Alderman Holmes would like it at some point to comment on a couple of things that you've said.
Absolutely.
If you could just, you have the microphone again, but let's have a little more of a dialogue.
Okay, sure.
No, I didn't want to comment on what Alderman Fisk was saying. I just wanted to share with the committee that I received an email while we were before we started our other meeting from one of my residents in the 2100 block of Maple. And she wanted to be here tonight. She said she wanted to tell the committee that making new laws isn't what's going to help. She feels that we have to start by actually enforcing the ones we have. Then she was going to tell the committee about the attack on her and her dog. And even though she filed a police report and was willing to sign a complaint, the woman didn't receive a ticket and didn't even offer to reimburse her for the more than $500 in vet bills. So she was sorry that she couldn't be here to say that. And her name is Melissa Lesser. And she also wanted to add that the education component is what's also important. How do we begin to educate our citizenry about any other local ordinances? She doesn't think that it's the police's role to do that. She does think that if more tickets were given out, that the word would get around pretty fast in terms of not having the dog on the leash and, doing that kind of thing. So that's a whole nother, perspective, I think, which supports what Mr. Barfield was saying. Part of the problem is that if you don't have control physically of your animal, then, that becomes a real big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Fisk.
I'm going to go on for a little bit. I think doing research on things like this is really interesting, so I hope you'll bear with me. Other communities have done this. Other communities are way ahead of us. Other communities have established commissions, which is why I asked the chief last time if his humane animal committee had actually been established and working. I had 6 people who wanted to serve on that, but that never came to pass. But other communities have established commissions and actually worked with the animal control officers to serve as an education component. And these are people who are behaviorists, people who have experience with problem dogs, trainers, all sorts of people who can help owners both manage their dogs, or if they can't manage their dogs, rehome their dogs, or find someone who can give them advice or direction with their dogs. So there's certainly a lot of opportunities in Evanston to do that. I want to draw the committee's attention, and I will send this to you in an email, of Highland Park's revised ordinance, which is actually online, where you can look at track the changes as they revise their dog ordinance. And again, with the establishment of a commission and holding the police department responsible for actually filing reports and reporting them back here to us. I mean, we're the committee that hears police complaints, and I don't think we've heard a dog complaint that I can remember. But we need them to do a better job. That said, I will tell you that my own experience with the police department has been very positive. I have heard of a lot of problems that people have had, not necessarily with bad dogs, but problem dogs, to excessive barking or bad behavior, aggressiveness even on a leash toward another dog. And the animal control officers have come out and been extraordinarily helpful, coming out several times to talk and provide some counsel to the people involved. And I've been very impressed with the work that they've done. But if they haven't done the work that you want them to do, then we need to get them to do that. So I guess what I'd say to the committee is I'd really encourage the committee to take a step back from this. At least in my feeling is that we need a better dialogue with the police department about what we expect them to do. And we expect citizens to have confidence that when they report a dog problem, that problem is going to be taken seriously and the police are going to respond appropriately. So I would ask that this be held in committee for us to review some ordinances from other communities, to ask the city attorney whether he would prefer that as he goes through the city code, which we're revising a lot of ordinances as we go through the city code. I mean, this is just something that we're trying to bring our city code up to date with. I would very much like to do that. I don't think we can pass this or even send it on to council with the language that's in it, because I think that we expose ourselves to some liability, because we're clearly not spelling out a case for due process for people who are caught in this possible designation of dangerous dog. And I'd ask if either one of you have any questions. We all do. I mean, but there are dogs that sometimes people are irresponsible, and sometimes there are problem dogs. And we all live together in a community, and everyone has to be safe. You and your dog have to be safe. And if somebody's letting their dog run off the leash or somebody's attacked your dog, we can't have that. So we all need to work together to make it better. So I guess what I'd ask is for the committee to hold it over. I would definitely like us to look into establishing a commission or committee to look at our ordinance and help us ensure that we have a better response from all parties involved.
I don't think we can hold it over, and we held it over once. We
Okay.
can't hold it over again. What I would recommend, Judy, is that we send it on to council, and then we can pull it off of the agenda, and then make those recommendations right at council.
I think I'd prefer than tabling it at committee for a month and keeping it here. This is where we can have this discussion. At council, you can come to the council and you can talk for a minute to 3 minutes. But here you can come and have a real discussion with us. And I really need to hear from the public and from everybody as to how we can work together to establish a system that really does work. And we just can't do that at council.
It doesn't seem to be happening here either. I think we've had some.
This is the third meeting.
No, it's second.
Second, I believe. But we've had some, I don't think anyone's in real disagreement either. I think that we are kind of all on the same page, working toward the same goal. I think sending it on to committee or to council is the best thing to do. I don't agree with some of the comments you made, and I think in Alderman Burris's defense, this was not a Band-Aid. This was a well-thought-out, planned revision of a portion of our code. And while there are other parts of our code that figure into it and also can be considered for amendments or revisions, holding this up seems unwise to me. I think that it certainly is a whole lot better than the original code, and I would be open to revisions or clarifications, certainly clarifications, but I do believe it was planned to say what it says, and as it says, based on some other communities and other research that Alderman Burris did. So I think that my recommendation would be to send it on to council.
Okay.
I tend to agree with that, and I think, Alderman Fisk, the committee that you talked about, the humane, I can't remember the name of it.
Well,
No, the advisory committee that you said that wasn't functioning. I mean, I think we just simply have to ask the city manager to make sure it functions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are other ways I think that we can enact that without, holding it up. Just send it on to council and we'll discuss it there.
I don't really think there is such committee. I think it was talked about but never really came to formation. So I think, if we're waiting on things like that to happen before we pass this on to council, we have a long wait. We're going to end up with backyard hens again. So I think that it's really best in the interest of the city and the residents to pass this along, make some clarifications, and it sounds piecemeal, but it isn't. I think we're all on the same page here. I don't think anybody's arguing the point that we need to enforce better rules, more clear rules, and take care of our dogs and our residents, or residents and our dogs.
Then I would move that paragraph, section 3, B.
B?
Yeah, there should be an A. If there's a section 3, there should be an A, but there's no A. So section 3B4 be stricken. on page 3.
I think it's one of the sections that, provisions that could be clarified. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I think it, in this case, certainly this could be clarified somewhat, as you spoke to earlier.
Well, normally we clarify these at committee, not at council. And that's, if you're going to move this onto council, I'm going to ask for that to be stricken. It can always be added back at council if that's what you want to do, if it's clarified and added back at council. But for right now, we shouldn't be. And I've got some more amendments as well.
But can't we ask the attorney to, based upon the, you had some language, and that could be added and brought to council when it comes? I mean, is that possible? I mean, you've already said the language that you'd like to see, Judy, and then we could have it and not have to deal with it there.
Well, I think paragraph 4 is a bigger issue. I think paragraph 4 is the paragraph where a dog can be caught in a neither here nor there, in a no man's land, and end up being destroyed, almost by mistake. And that's where I think that's what I think needs more thought on the part of the committee. We can add whatever legal language we want to add, but I think the committee really needs to think about what it is, what the intention of this legislation is, without saying any more than that. This paragraph is a big problem.
It's my understanding that it really prevents the owner of the animal to just at will take the dog from its determined place. Certainly could be clarified about the conditions for which the dog should or could be transported to a medical facility or whatever the dog would need. But again, it's clarification or expansion of this, and I think point 5 does also play into that as well. To me, again, it's just clarification.
Well, 5 needs to be better defined based on what happens with 4. But what 4 specifically says, and remember, I mean, this is law. This is law. We rely on what this language says. We don't say, well, maybe in this case or maybe in that case. What this language says is that a dog that is not in that enclosure, when a dog leaves that enclosure, that dog can be identified, impounded, and destroyed.
And
that's not what we want to do.
Right, and that's what I thought you said, and I'm just saying, can't we get the right language so that we can, move ahead with that?
Yes, we can.
And that's what I was asking the attorney.
But I don't think we can do that tonight.
Well, I'm not sure that we can do it at all. That's why I'm asking if the staff could maybe present something to the council when it moves on to the council.
Council, do you have an understanding, clear of what our intention is at this point, or is it still rather vague?
If I understand what the, Kathy Aganis from the City Attorney's Office, if I understand the concern of the committee, it seems to be about whether putting in a more specific definition, perhaps, of what it means for a dog to be not confined to an enclosure, and perhaps putting in an exception saying, if it's under the control of the owner, if it's being transported for purposes or for legitimate purposes or being walked or whatever it is. I think what I hear Alderman Fisk saying is that we want this to be some sort of a negligence standard, that the dog isn't being confined the way it's meant to be confined.
Exactly. And other ordinances in other communities talk in terms of having a 6-foot-high fence around the backyard. We're already talking in this ordinance about the dog cannot be in a house with the windows open and just screens. Doesn't say anything about how you get the dog from its enclosure into the house. Again, I'm sorry to be so picky about this, but I mean, this is the law. And somebody could show up at your house who doesn't like this, and your dog's in trouble, and you're in trouble. And depending on how that is changed, then number 5 needs to better reflect prior to a decision. Well, what decision?
And I have spoken to the attorney who drafted this in conjunction with Alderman Burris. That was a concern that I had identified as well. What does it mean prior to a decision? She told me the intention of this section was for the language to read or to be interpreted to say prior to a decision on whether the dog is dangerous, not prior to a decision on whether the dog should be destroyed. So in other words, that these procedures, you mentioned due process, that these procedures would take place before the dog was designated as dangerous in the first place.
Okay.
So that language can be changed as well, right?
That language can be added if the committee directs me to add it.
And then on the Section 2, Paragraph A, the designation of dangerous dogs. Number 1, where it says the chief of police or his or her designee may, after conducting an investigation, declare a dog to be a dangerous dog. The investigation may include any and all of the following. I'd like the may to become shall. At least one of those. Something has to be met, because otherwise nothing needs to be met here. The chief of police can just declare a dog to be a dangerous dog. Again, in other ordinances around our area, they put this, the designation of dangerous dogs in the hands of the administrative adjudication hearing officer or the court, rather than in the hands of the police chief. And that comes back to my question about there are so many different entities involved in designation here that for the dog owner who is trying to appeal, it's not clear when and to whom that dog owner appeals. And I want there to be a clear line of responsibility of to whom a dog owner may appeal. We've had a successful situation in Evanston where a dangerous dog has been adequately provided for, and where the owners took full responsibility to do it. I know this can be done.
And who did make that decision? And
I don't. It wasn't in my ward. I don't know how that decision was made.
But, you know, I know that this is not the first time that we've heard issues with our warden. And, you know, maybe the police chief is, I mean, I understand it can be his designee, but I hear people constantly then having to go over, after they've talked to the warden, to then go to the police chief. So maybe that is something that, you know, the deputies here tonight, that we can discuss with the police chief in terms of how to tighten that up so that there's not so many people. There can be a clear direction in terms of who you need to contact. Because if you're not getting, usually if you don't get the response from the usual contact people, being the warden, then you would go, you know, to the next level, I guess, which would be the police chief or his designee. I'm not sure which department it would come under the police department. But if that's a problem, then we maybe can ask the police to make that really clear. We can send that out to let people know exactly what the steps are. And then that would help clear that up.
And that's fine, and I think the law department needs to look at that. But I would recommend that if we're going to stick with the language that we have in here, that may become a shall. Again, so that will prevent either the chief of police or his or her designee from just saying this is a dangerous dog with absolutely no supporting information. So if you change it to a shall, then one of these things is going to happen, one or all of these things, or as many of them, have to be met. Consideration of evidence pertaining to the temperament of the dog, evaluation of any and all testimony, documentation, or information regarding pending or prior complaints, arrests regarding the animal, or any medical or veterinary evidence regarding the animal. So it's just, I mean, that would be something that I would hope that we would be doing anyway. But without that shall in there, it doesn't have to happen. And there again, a dog can fall through the cracks.
I would agree.
Okay.
So I guess finally what I'd say to the committee is that if the two of you wish this to go on to council, again, we can do one of two things. We can make the changes, bring it back to this committee for a vote, or we can send it on to council with the understanding that there's going to be a discussion of language changes in here. So whichever you prefer.
Well, I would prefer that we instruct staff now in terms of the language changes so that when it comes to council, those changes are already there and we don't have to have the discussion again in terms of, unless we need to clean the language up or something.
I'd like an opportunity to meet with staff and discuss my concerns with them, if that's all right with the committee.
Certainly, certainly. I don't have, take issue with your comments. It's just more dragging the process that I'm concerned about, and I think that we can accomplish both. I think you're meeting with staff and legal working on this in the interim, that we can get it to council in a form that's going to be readily or fairly well acceptable to all parties.
But remember, this isn't addressing their problems. This is not addressing their problems. And their problem is that they don't feel that the police department is being responsive on those issues. Right?
It was very complicated for me working with the ward and the police department around.
Right.
And I didn't have a ticket, and then I was asked whether the dog had a shot. Took them 2 months to get back to me to tell me if the dog had attacked me, had his shot. And then
You need to come up to the microphone. I'm really sorry, but no one can hear you on television.
Okay. I'm sorry.
The process in reporting a dog bite is not very clear, and when the police did come out after the first time, the second time, they said, oh, well, we can't do nothing about it. I said, well, I've called before about this dog. And then they said they didn't have no record, and I happened to have the beating them. I said, I did call it before. Then they told me I didn't go to a hospital, so therefore they couldn't make the dog dangerous. And I said, well, I wish I had known that I had scratches, but I was just so dumbfounded from it, I didn't go to a hospital. So the second time, really, when I was laying into it, and the police chief was very nice about it, but I had to go to meetings, and I had to go to court, and I found the animal warden was not very helpful.
Okay.
And I'm not knocking them, but they were not helpful.
Even more reason to have a committee.
And I was dumb
to look
as
at
a
it.
citizen on what to do with a dog bite.
Right, no, I understand, and that's what we're trying to address, is what the best way is to be responsive to your concerns.
Maybe we could hear from the division chief, Jim Rez, and see what he thinks that how we could streamline this process and make it certainly known to the public that we are taking this seriously.
Members of the committee, Deputy Chief Jeff Jamraz. I will speak to the chief regarding this. The process should be streamlined. Anyone that wants to come in and make a police report regarding an animal bite should be able to do that, regardless whether they're showing visible injuries or not, because we don't know the extent of a scratch or a bite or anything like that. So I think that's the first part of starting the process is taking the report, documenting whatever information you have that day of when it happened, where it happened, the extent of your injuries, and we should be instructed to take some photos of those injuries, so we've got some documentation of what occurred that day. So there could be some follow-up investigation by animal control. That's no different than any other report that we take at any other given time. Yes, Alderman Fisk.
Could we also ask you to keep a better eye on the various parks and playgrounds where people are letting their dogs off leash?
Sure.
And can I ask one more question? Are the parking enforcement officers allowed to give tickets for this sort of thing, or are they strictly speaking just parking?
Strictly parking. In the past, historically, I don't believe it falls under their responsibilities of doing that. So.
Right. Okay.
Are the park rangers? Do they have that authority?
I'm not quite sure, actually. I can find out for you, but in the past, I don't recall them. Usually, if there's an incident or some other, they need people moved from a particular area, they just contact us on the radio, and we respond accordingly to make sure that they leave. And if there's someone there for a curfew violation or out there, we can make sure that gets enforced.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to call the vote at this time and just get beyond this point. We do have a few more agenda items. Those in favor of moving this to council with the provision that it'll be reviewed by staff and legal prior to, and that Alderman Fisk will have the opportunity to meet with both in the interim before it does reach council, say aye.
And with the proposed changes.
And with the proposed changes that we have discussed tonight, particularly regarding Section 4, numbers 4 and 5. In Section 2, the word shall.
Okay, wait, let me just quickly make sure there's nothing else in here that I need.
Okay. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
Me? Only because I think this is the place for it to stay.
Thank you. Item H3, homeless prevention and rapid rehousing update and proposed reallocation of funds. I think that this is actually first time it's appeared on our agenda. Would someone like to speak to this from the staff? And I think I understand it's fairly simple on what you're requesting here.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Steve Griffin with the Office of Community and Economic Development. I have Sarah Flax, our Grants and Housing Administrator, with me. Back in December, we had, of last year, we brought to you a reallocation. Since that time, we've done a lot of scrubbing and work. This has been a very successful grant program, the HPRP, and in that, on the second page of the memo, you'll see that of the $801,000 that had been appropriated just over 2 years ago, we've been able to serve to date 122 households and 201 individuals. I think the most striking thing is that there's those 122 households, 103 have exited, and 89 of the households are stable. So there's an 86% success rate. But unfortunately, the grant is about spent down. We're looking and projecting that by the end of this calendar year, all the funds should be spent. So what we're bringing to you tonight is, Sarah and I had met last week with all the sub-recipients. We had set this grant up with the city being the administrator and 6 sub-recipients basically managing the cases and the case services. And with that meeting, we three of them have realized that they will not take any new clients on or cases. And so by pulling the resources together, we're proposing to reallocate a little over $70,000 to the 3 agencies that are still involved, that being the YMCA, CETA, and Connections for the Homeless. So what we're asking you to do is between the agencies that are basically spent down and the work we still have to do with this, to reallocate these $70,000 to those 3 agencies that remain, and then we'll work with those agencies in closing this grant down. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and then Sarah's certainly here that knows a lot more than I about this grant.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk?
Did we move and second this? No. Okay, can I make a motion?
Certainly.
Okay. I'd like to move that we accept the proposed reallocation of funds.
Are there questions for Mr. Griffith or Ms. Flax? None? Hearing none, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Item number H4. 2011 Emergency Shelter Grant Recommendation. Again, we will have some help from the staff in understanding what you're asking for. Again, I think it's something pretty similar.
Good evening, Sarah Flax, Housing and Grants Administrator. Thank you, Alderman Tendam and members of the committee. The Emergency Shelter Grant Program is one of the city's 3 entitlement grants. It is the smallest in terms of total dollar value historically. We've received approximately $80,000 to $85,000 a year in emergency shelter grants. It, like all of our HUD grants, has specific uses. And I do want to apologize that we were missing one chart. In your package, thanks. In case you were wondering where that chart referred to was. There it is. The Emergency Shelter Grant Program is primarily, the way it's currently formatted, is primarily to address the needs of the chronically homeless population, not exclusively, but primarily. And there are 4 uses or eligible costs that the city has historically used its ESG funding for. Essential services, which are basically social services, or in the case, for example, of what Interfaith Action provides, the soup kitchen. That falls under what HUD considers essential services. Operational costs are when we are paying, or when the funds are being used for the operating expenses of a shelter. It can be an overnight shelter, it can be a day shelter, but it's usually things like rent, utilities, staff that maintains the facility, that sort of thing. Homeless prevention is a category similar to the prevention funding in HPRP, where somebody who is at high risk of homelessness can receive services. Unlike HPRP, it isn't direct assistance. It's counseling and that sort of thing. Not HPRP can actually, you can pay rent, utilities, that sort of stuff. And administrative costs are simply the city's costs to manage the grant. ESG is going to be undergoing a shift. In fact, that was in the president's budget and in the plan for 2011. It was to shift to a much more HPRP-like model, but Congress didn't fund it at the level to accomplish that. Therefore, our direction from HUD was to continue with the first release of funds, which is $84,885, and use that basically the same way we have historically used our funds. The chart, which was to demonstrate that we are in fact doing that, shows you how these allocations parallel what we did in 2010-2011. The city will then receive a second allocation. We don't know the timing of that, nor do we know how we will be instructed to use it. But given that our fiscal year runs out at the end of December, we want to be able to get the support to the agencies. They're doing very important work. The Family Promise is providing services to homeless families using a day shelter in Evanston, and then they provide overnight shelter at various religious congregations facilities in the North Shore. Interfaith Action provides 2 types of services. One is a day shelter, the hospitality center, where homeless people can go and spend some time, get some services, food, and literally get off the street. And, as I mentioned, the soup kitchen, which serves actually probably the broadest number of non-homeless people as well. The YWCA, the funding is to support their shelter, specifically to buy food for the people who are housed in the shelter. Connections for the Homeless provides a broad range of services. The operational costs are for Hilda's Place, which is a 20-bed adult transitional shelter, and Essential Services is a broad range of services, case management, medical assistance, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the allocations. Any questions?
The administrative costs, stupid question, but they are adequate to cover our involvement. They're relatively low, which is good.
They're very low. Actually, ESG never covers its administrative costs, but, because it is only 5% of the grant, which is one of the lowest allocations for any federal grant of this type. One of the things they're talking about doing with the move to the new version, which is the Emergency Solutions Grant, is to raise it to 7.5%. We need to be mindful of how we spend our administrative costs, obviously. And one of the things is we are working with experienced agencies that know the drill, know what to do, and are good at serving the population that they're serving.
These are all terrific agencies.
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Flax? Alderman Fisk?
Do we need a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I move that we recommend approval of the allocations of the 2011 Emergency Shelter Grant funding totaling $84,885.
Those in favor? Aye. So moved. We have items for discussion. First, update on citizen review of police complaints. Are there any questions, comments? Alderman Holmes? Alderman Fisk? None? Okay.
I don't have any questions.
Great, thank you. And as far as the HH2, the Ordinance 49011, provisional adopting, enacting, and reenacting new and amended code provisions to Titles 8, 9, and 10 of the City of Evanston Code. I don't think we have adequately had the time to look at this. That would be my first opinion. I think Alderman Grover and Alderman Braithwaite were of a similar mind that we hold this for a future discussion. Does anyone have a concern about that? It will be yours to dive into.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
With the code update, I'm sure the Corporation Council has explained this on all the previous occasions. The opportunity in committee is for a markup, but irrespective of committee action, this is on the council's agenda for Monday, August 8th.
Oh, it is? Okay.
As with all the provisional ordinances in the code modernization project.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, these are just cleanups to bring them into more up to date and, whatever corrections legal has looked at as they go through all of our city codes and ordinance. I think that's what it is, isn't it?
Overall, that's correct. There's a lot of just updating the language, removing extraneous code sections, things like that. But as you'll see in the memo, which is in your packet, in these particular three titles, which are the Health Code, the Public Safety Code, and the Motor Vehicle Code, there are the range of changes is a bit more extensive. These being very technical parts of the code, the departments that are responsible for administrating and executing the provisions of these codes have made a number of suggestions in order to improve enforcement here. So that memo does set forth those changes in significantly more detail than has been seen with some of the other titles, and will point out the changes that tend to be more substantive as opposed to just technical.
Okay.
I would suggest we move it on, and if they have questions and that they will be able to ask those at council, and also to hold it there or to send it back if they have other suggestions.
And perhaps that one, the not so structural, but changes you just spoke of could be highlighted in our packet. It's a huge document to wade through. And
absolutely, the memo does. It breaks it down by title and highlights in each title which changes are among the are the substantive changes.
Okay. Thank you. A couple announcements.
We're sending it on to council.
Oh, yes, we're just sending it on to council. Any opposed? Thank you. A couple communications. We do have a change in chairmanship for the next meeting. Alderman Fisk will be resuming the chair of this committee. The next meeting is Wednesday, September the 7th at 7:30. Sorry? Thank you. Move to approve or adjourn. I'm sorry.
So moved.
Thank you.